Hello and welcome to You with Jesus. This episode is all bad, but it's for a greater good. And the reason it's all bad is because I want to look at Jesus' betrayal and arrest and denial. B, betrayal. A, arrest. D, denial. But what humans intended for evil, God intended for good, the saving of many lives. Just as he was speaking, Judas, one of the 12, appeared. With him was a crowd armed with swords and clubs sent from the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. This is the moment of betrayal. Jesus had been praying in the Garden of Gethsemane with his sleepy disciples. And he sees a crowd armed with swords and clubs. And who is at the front of the crowd? Judas, one of the 12 disciples. He knew where they would find Jesus. He knew the secret places that Jesus went to pray. How could it possibly have come to this? It is one thing to deny Christ, but to actively betray your friend to those who wanted to see your friend killed? That's got to be an abominable act. And we come to the vexed, long-standing theological debate referred to as God's sovereignty versus human responsibility. And those who stand on the God's sovereignty side of the debate say that nothing happens, good or ill, without the direction of God, that all things are under his control and he wills all things according to his ultimate end. Those who stand on the human responsibility side of the debate say no, humans have free will and God does not control them like robots. Humans choose either evil or good. They choose either God or the devil. The circumstances of life are dictated by human choice, not the direction of God. Well, as with many things, both can be true at once. God is both in complete control of every circumstance, even human choices, and at the same time, humans are determining their future based on the state of their own hearts and what's important to them. And in Scripture, you find both being said about the same incident. And it's a question of emphasis. And sometimes it's this emphasis that's expressed, other times it's this emphasis being expressed, but expressing this doesn't disqualify that, and expressing this doesn't disqualify that. For example, Pharaoh, he refused to listen to Moses and let God's people go. 9 times it says God hardened Pharaoh's heart, God's sovereignty. And 9 times it says Pharaoh hardened his own heart. And the inference I draw from this is that God did not harden Pharaoh's heart without his very willing cooperation. God's hardening of Pharaoh's heart was a strengthening and confirming of the fact that Pharaoh's heart was already hard. But the hardening of Pharaoh's heart was the way that God chose to deliver Israelites out of Egypt. Without the hardening, there would have been no rescue and miraculous deliverance. And so we come to Judas. Without the hardening, there would not have been a betrayal and an arrest and a crucifixion. And what was the source of the hardening of Judas's heart? Well, it was the same as Pharaoh. It's both God's sovereignty and human responsibility operating in tandem together. It had been prophesied that one of the Messiah's close friends would lift his heel against him, that he would be sold for 30 pieces of silver. This had been part of the plan of God all along. This act of betrayal by Judas did not take Jesus by surprise. Jesus chose Judas as a disciple, knowing that he would betray him. Have I not chosen you 12? And yet one of you is the devil. But this act of betrayal began many years before. Judas had been in charge of the disciples' money bag. So Jesus and his disciples would go out on these ministry trips and people would freely contribute to his costs, and that would go into a kitty, and from it they would draw what they needed to survive. And Judas was responsible to look after that money bag. But what does it say? He was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. That's right. He's pocketing a bunch of cash for his personal use. Money that was intended for Jesus and his friends. Do you think Jesus didn't know about this? He absolutely knew. And he chose him as a disciple knowing he was a greedy thief who didn't want to change. And Judas saw a great opportunity to make even more money if he could do a deal with Jesus' enemies, to hand Jesus over to them. And they agreed on the amount, 30 pieces of silver. Was God's hand active in Judas's betrayal to fulfill divine purpose? Yes, it was. Was Judas responsible for his own actions? Yes, he was. Jesus says the Son of Man will go just as it is written about him, but woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born. And so judgment fell on Judas because of his actions. And racked with guilt, he later threw the 30 pieces of silver back in their faces and went and hung himself. Now we come to the arrest. Let's read. The man seized Jesus and arrested him. Then one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Am I leading a rebellion, said Jesus, that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I was with you teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me. But the scriptures must be fulfilled. Then everyone deserted him and fled. A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. They had come with swords and clubs to arrest him, but it wasn't necessary because Jesus is willingly submitting himself to them. The only moment of drama is when Peter has a rush of blood and strikes the ear of the servant of the high priest, cuts off his ear. And it's interesting because Jesus reaches out and heals the ear, making it the last recorded healing miracle of Jesus. Jesus then asked the rhetorical question, am I leading a rebellion? The obvious answer is no, but they had never fully grasped the intentions of Jesus. They had never understood that the kingdom of God was not a kingdom of this world, but all this too was simply a fulfillment of prophecy. Then those on the side of Jesus, the disciples and perhaps others, when they saw that this was a battle they could not win, they all deserted him and fled. And one young man, believed to be Mark, the author of the gospel, when he realizes his game was up, he bolts. But someone managed to grab his gym jams. And as he ran, they were ripped away from him. And so he flees naked. This picture is hardly a noble band of defenders willing to suffer whatever consequences there might be for standing with Jesus. Nope, they're out of there. But there was one denial of Jesus that would be particularly noted in the Gospels. That's right. They took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the teachers of the law came together. Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. There he sat with the guards and warmed himself at the fire. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death, but they did not find any. Many testified falsely against him, but their statements did not agree. Then some stood up and gave this false testimony against him. We heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days will build another, not made with hands. Yet even then their testimony did not agree. Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you? But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Again the high priest asked him, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? I am, said Jesus, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. The high priest tore his clothes. Why do we need any more witnesses? He asked. You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? They all condemned him as worthy of death. Then some began to spit at him. They blindfolded him, struck him with their fists, and said, prophesy. And the guards took him and beat him. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she looked closely at him. You also were with that Nazarene Jesus, she said. But he denied it. I don't know or understand what you're talking about, he said, and went out into the entryway. When the servant girl saw him there, she said again to those standing around, this fellow is one of them. Again, he denied it. After a little while, those standing near said to Peter, surely you are one of them, for you are a Galilean. He began to call down curses and he swore to them, I don't know this man you're talking about. Immediately the rooster crowed the second time. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times. And he broke down and wept. Peter loved Jesus. He hated seeing what was happening. He had struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. And when everyone else fled, Peter decided to linger in the shadows and follow and see what was happening to Jesus from a distance. Maybe he just couldn't bear to fully abandon him. And he placed his own life at risk by doing this, which is more than we can say for the other disciples who are as far away from harm's way as possible. They're gone. Not Peter. He's there in the courtyard. Yeah, I'm just warming myself by this little fire you got burning here. And he stayed up all night. The cock would soon crow, declaring the dawning of a new day. The servant girl approaches him. You're with him too, weren't you? Peter replies, don't know what you're talking about. But then she sees him again and she outs him in front of others, but he denies it. The cock crows for the first time, but his accent gives him away as a Galilean. And so they ask him again. And this third time he gets real mad and starts swearing at them and carrying on. Then the cock crows a second time. Jesus had predicted Peter would deny him in this way. But he also adds this very comforting word. Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat, but I've prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. Jesus knew that all of the disciples would feel guilty for abandoning Jesus and that they would be grieved that he had gone. And Jesus, foreknowing the situation, affirms Peter's leadership, even in the anticipation of his denial, and says that Peter has a role to play in strengthening his brothers. And so he tells him in advance, don't go beating up on yourself. Are you in the habit of beating up on yourself, perhaps for a perceived failure on your part? The problem is if we stay in that place, we're not able to move on in our relationship with God. And we miss the fact that God has a purpose for us beyond our disappointment, and us wallowing in our own mud is hindering the blessing that he wants to bring to others through us. See you in the next episode.